Hello, I'm Ibrahim Imam, and welcome to this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. In this episode, we will continue our exploration of locked-in syndrome. Today, I will be speaking with Kate Allatt about her experience of locked-in syndrome. This is an experience that she narrated in her book titled Running Free, published by Accent Press in 2011. Kate has an extraordinary journey of resilience after being buried alive. That's in her words, the result of a brainstem stroke she had when she was just 39. She described this as a condition where you can feel, think, hear, and see completely normally, but unable to move a single muscle. She started writing her internationally published book, Running Free, the day after she left hospital in 2010. That's a sign of determination. And the book has been showcased in quite a few forums, BBC Jeremy Vine, ITV This Morning, BBC Breakfast, The One Show, Women's Hour, Newsnight. We can carry on and on, actually, just to show how popular and well accepted the book has been. In addition, she founded a charity just 3 months after leaving hospital in 2011. She's an inspirational speaker and will discuss the impact that her advocacy and peer mentoring has made to thousands of families around the world. Kate Allatt, welcome to the Neurology Lounge podcast, and thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a great privilege to actually, give a different perspective on the condition I've flourished from, because, it's really important, when in the world of crushing hopes, that there is light. And I do represent quite a few people who've done quite well with their similar conditions. So it's just putting a different story across, which is great.
I'm hoping we can get that right across. So you wrote the book as soon as you left hospital. Why did you? Why the urgency, and how did you go about writing it?
Well, a friend of a friend happened to be a book publisher. When I was in hospital, I didn't know this. She was fascinated by my non-fiction story. So that was look number one. So I didn't go searching the publishing deal. Number two, what drove me was my kids were 4, 8, and 10. Okay. Now, as a mum, I was very hands-on. I'm not now or older, but it meant so much to me because I was convinced. I nearly died. I was running 70 miles a week at 39. I was super fit, running around doing a 2-hour run, and then 12 hours later, I'm on life support with this brainstem stroke. And I was convinced that it could happen again. And so what compelled me, as beyond being with my children, I was incredibly happy to be reunited with after 10 months, or just under 10 months of being in hospital. It was so important for me to have my story out, to get it out there so my kids knew. They knew what had happened to me, because I genuinely didn't believe I would survive. I got it in my head that it will happen again and no one would know what I went through. That was why I wanted them to know their mum.
Okay, that's a very personal objective. Did you have a wider goal of letting other people be aware?
Yes, I did. That was the immediate reason. Yeah. The second reason was because there was so much pessimism around my perceived quality of life that should I recover, I couldn't possibly have any quality of life, that my family were given the option to pull the plug on the life support. And my husband didn't, my ex-husband didn't, because the kids needed me. Well, because they loved me. But that aside, he's now an ex-husband. When I realised how I'd managed to walk out of hospital, how I managed to run by my first anniversary, how I managed to eat again, hug my kids, and the way I willed my body, which I didn't know about neuroplasticity at the time, repetitive, frequent, intensive movements. I called it willing in my book. I did that intuitively because I wanted to be home with my kids. I had nothing. I was a marketeer. I didn't know what I was doing. I just would stare at a limb and in my head I'd be going, move, damn you, just bloody move. And And that's how I got every part of my body back to life. It took ages and ages. But the repetition I did, I don't think people realize there's some Japanese study done on the optimum amount of times you should repeat an exercise to try and get better outcomes. And I blew that research out of the water. I mean, I wasn't just doing 3 lots of 10 sets, a day. I was doing it every single day with just 15, 20 minutes off, whether I was working on this or I was working on rotating my arm or lifting my head, moving my head, or my lips, my tongue, my swallow. I was obsessed like I was a runner. That was probably good that I was so a good runner. So when I realized, in answer to your question, why that I had done it my way, despite what the neurologist said I should do, or thinking about my quality of life as opposed to trying to rehabilitate me, and actually I proved them wrong. And I'm sorry, but I did. And my work since is testament to that. I knew that I had a really important message to get out. So when I started writing my book, that was when I realized, gee, there's something in what I did, and this could help other people. And it has.
There's a story of hope rather than anything else, really.
It is. It is. And if it matters to you to go and hug your kids, to run again, to walk out of hospital, that is the key. It's got whatever it is to each of every one of us. You get into that. I do believe you can achieve anything as long as you're prepared to try really flipping hard and accept the horrible failures along the way. But don't think of them as failures, think of them as learnings. Then you will get there. You will, whatever you want to do, you'll get there. If I wanted to walk again and I've got a spinal injury, I could do it if I had 80 grand in the back pocket for an exoskeleton. I wouldn't. But if it mattered to me enough, it matters. That's the key. So I mean, it's not just locked in because it's quite rare. It's all young stroke survivors. They have to rewire their brain to get things working again. So that's why it's been this appeal for 13 years. It's still selling. It's internationally published because people who've had any kind of stroke, from a TIA all the way to the worst one I had and everything in between, have improved their outcomes by reading my book and applying what I did to their own rehabilitation. So, it's amazing.
Very positive. But let's go back to how it all started. As you said, you were just 39 at the time. You had a headache for the first time in your life. You never had a headache before.
No. I had headaches, but I've never had a migraine. And it was what I would have thought would be a migraine.
Okay.
So for 2 weeks, it started, and it just slowly started, and it never went after water or paracetamol. But the intensity after 2 weeks, just before the whole thing burst with the illness, with the clots, it was like a pneumatic drill in my head. It wasn't painful in terms of being hurt with pain. It was the noise inside my head, and I did this in my ears, but it was like a pneumatic drill. That was the point at which, the moments before the artery disintegrated because of the clot. That's how it felt.
And you were told it was a migraine at the beginning. As you said, you've never had a migraine. Were you satisfied with the diagnosis at that time, or did you think this is, even though you haven't had a migraine, this is a bit more than that?
No. Well, look, what you have to understand is I was running a marketing business. My kids, I was the main carer. My ex-husband was away doing what he did away from home. And our kids had 3 after-school activities every day. They had friends over. I worked from 9 till 3. I then did kids stuff till 9 at night, and then I worked. I went to the hospital with the headache, and they said that I told them about my lifestyle, and the junior doctor on the Sunday, the 6th of February 2010, said, "You're doing far too much. Here, have some Cocodamol and go to bed." And they took my BP, and my BP was in normal range. But because I never had a CT and MRI or anything like that, because they never actually asked me what was my normal BP. My normal BP was so low because I ran 70 miles a week. Wow. So the system, I slipped through the system. So when they said, you're all fine, you're normal, everything's okay, just go home and rest. Here's some cocodamol. I'm like, phew, I've got him to get to football practice. I've got her to get to dancing. I've got to get the roast dinner on. I didn't push back because I didn't have time to be ill. Yeah. And I thought, I'm so fit. So I was misdiagnosed. There was massive errors. There wasn't a question of what's normal for you. It was, you're fitting our graph. That's it.
Yeah. And then you started slurring. It's after that you started slurring your words, and you said your body became...
Well, I was slurring before because I went to a walk-in centre and the lovely nurse didn't try and upset my child that was with me at the time. And she said, just go to the Northern General, just get them check out. Then she knew because I was slurring.
Okay.
But that wasn't picked up by the junior doctor.
Wasn't felt to be okay. And what was going on through your mind? Even at that stage, it was, I need to get back to life, is it? I just need to...
What was going on was, this is very weird, but okay, that's okay, because if it's just doing too much, I'll go and rest. I didn't, generally, I have to be honest, I didn't push back because I almost wanted to hear the words that I was okay. Yeah. It was just doing too much. Obviously, sliding doors and everything else, I would have pushed back because, you know, what I now know with all my research and all the work I've done, that marker, the BP, was the issue. It was, you know, you need to know what's normal for everybody, not the graph that's normal.
That's a lesson for every doctor, really. We do have these norms, and once you're in it, that's it. You're okay. So what happened then? How did you eventually end up in hospital?
Well, what happened? I went to the walk-in centre. They said on the Sunday, quite important in February because there's a rotation of doctors, go to the main hospital, Northern General, and just get checked out. And so that was the process. I went to the Northern General, they checked me out, they said, you're doing too much, here's cocodamol, we'll go and rest. 4 hours later, I went to bed. 4 hours later, worse headache, worse. Came downstairs, my husband said, do you want a cup of tea? You look terrible. And I went, and the words that came out of my mouth were all gobbledygooch. Blah, blah. In my head, it was quite clear, yes, can I have a cup of Earl Grey? But what came out was gobbledygooch, and he came running in with a glass of water, spilt it everywhere. As I sat on the sofa, my whole body went rigid, total paralysis straight away. Slid off the sofa onto the floor, wet myself, everything stopped working. And I just remember in and out of consciousness, it was sometime before the ambulance man could get me out of the room, but I was in and out of consciousness. But we went back to the hospital where the same junior doctor was on, and apparently he went very grey because it was only 4 hours after he'd misdiagnosed me. And then within hours, I was on life support because, I mean, locked-in syndrome, the best way to describe it, yes, you can think, feel, see, hear everything but move nothing. But think of people more familiar with motor neuron disease, but think of the last stages of motor neuron disease. You can't talk, you can't breathe, you can't eat, you can't go to a toilet, you can't do anything for yourself. That was what I got instantly. 12 hours earlier, I'm running around Chatsworth. 12 hours later, I'm in the end stages of motor neuron disease. Not motor neuron disease, but just like it.
And the diagnosis was made by a scan. Were you aware at the time that you had this? I mean, when your family was told you had a stroke, were you aware? Were you conscious, or
no?
No,
I wasn't aware of that until they didn't tell me, confirm it for 2 weeks in ICU. I was there 9 weeks in ICU. They didn't confirm I'd had a stroke, and I'm lying there, not able to blink, see or do anything, just hear, but they couldn't tell me that, so they'd just sit and talk to me. And they said, "Oh, you've had a stroke." And I'm in my head, I'm like going, "That's what happens to old people.
Yeah.
What do you mean? I'm a runner, I'm fit, I'm young." I couldn't believe, because of my age bias with stroke at the time.
Yeah.
Not now.
But the type of stroke you had was kind of something that could be seen in younger people, wasn't it? You had this dissection in the tear in the artery of your neck.
I had it specifically because I can remember the diagnosis on my medical notes. It was a right vertical artery dissection, occlusion, and infarction of the pons.
So yeah, something we can't see.
Hardcore.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so you couldn't benefit. I mean, usually they give clot busting drugs for strokes. You couldn't benefit from it. What was the reason?
That's so interesting. That's so interesting you say, because it's an issue of mine. Because there wasn't medical negligence. I was misdiagnosed. I was in hospital. I could have been diagnosed. But the issue was, because I was considered stressed and not a stroke, I didn't get offered thrombolysis. Had they done the test and spotted it, they could have given it me there and then. 4 hours later, it was too late.
Despite that, you still made it out of there. So describe to me you coming around from loss of consciousness and realizing that people think you are still you're not there. You knew you were there, but people thought
when I came out of the coma, the medically induced coma, and I didn't have any flutters in my eyelids, so there was nothing I was so scared, so scared. I mean, ICU is the most scary place to be in, especially at night. Obviously, I had massive insomnia because I'd sleep all day because there was nothing to do. I was so bored. I mean, the only thing I had was 4-hourly turns and paracetamols and drugs and whatever else, and bed baths. So you sleep in the day, then you can't sleep at night, and that's horrific. When I came out of it, I couldn't compute and process why my head voice is speaking words like "that's hurting" or "please move that," or "I'm too hot." I was so hot all the time. I'm bored and lonely and scared and separation anxiety and hallucinations. Oh my God, it goes on. That I couldn't understand why what I was thinking in my head and saying in my head wasn't, people didn't know what I was saying. They were looking at me and they're just crying, or they were sad and they were head bowed. And I'm saying, "I'm talking to you, why are you ignoring me?" And initially it was really, really hard to understand what had happened to me. So all I had was this head voice. I was just scared. I was so scared. And I was very scared and worried. I mean, as you do as a mum, you think about your kids. It was just horrible. And then it took 8 weeks for this thumb to flicker 3 millimeters. That was it.
Wow.
And then from that, I made it 5, and then I got this movement, and then as I got more movement, this finger came in. It was up until then, though, I had nothing. It was just, I wanted to pull my own plug out of my life support. It was horrible.
And you were trying to communicate, and nobody could.
Well, what happened was 2 weeks. 2 weeks after my coma, my best friend, who's been extraordinary, she noticed the slightest flicker in my eyelids, and she always believed I was still inside. She was the only one that did. Everybody else thought I was vegetative or semi-conscious or whatever, and she thought, no, there's still Kate in there. And she saw these flickers, and she went away out, and the next day she came back with 2 pieces of A4, one with the letters A to Z on, and one with a stick man so she could point to parts of the man, because she thought, if I've sat for 10 minutes in one position, I'm going to find that uncomfortable. You've sat for 4 hours. I need to know you must be in pain. If I point and you try and flutter that little movement, then I can try and help you be more comfortable. And on the letter board, she said, listen, I know you understand. I'm going to point to a letter and you're going to try and flutter once for no. And try and flutter twice if you want me to stop on a letter, and I'll write it down and maybe we can make a word.
Is she
anyway, I got it.
Medically trained? Sorry. Is she medically trained? No.
No, they didn't even know the hospital that I was able to do this at this point. Okay. And anyway, so I set off from A and we went all the way to S and I fluttered once. That took 25 minutes because me thinking of fluttering, there's a delay. Meanwhile, she's often looking at a piece of paper or looking at the next letter and she's missing it. Yeah. So frustrating. But eventually we got the first letter, it was S. So I fluttered twice, she wrote it down. Went back to A, went all the way to L, fluttered twice. Again, took a long time, wrote it down. Back to A, all the way to E, fluttered twice, and thank God she said, SLA, sleep. What? Can't sleep. Fluttered twice. And then she said, at night, fluttered twice. Wow. Can I tell you, that moment that I was still physically paralyzed from the eyelids down. But in that moment, it was like every birthday I've had, my kids have had, every Christmas, times a billion. That moment of, geez, they can understand me. God, it was huge, huge. And then when she then went to see the nurses and the doctors, she got evidence and she was able to request sleeping pills because I could sleep then at night and some pain relief that I wasn't getting. And then they introduced a proper board, but they didn't have an end of word box on. So quite often it was so frustrating. So yeah, but that's how it happened. But the moment that I was understood through my blinks, communication was huge.
And during that time when you couldn't move, you could still feel, you still had sensation.
It's so interesting, and everyone's the same. It's not just me. If you were to touch my hand, see, I've got shortened fingers. If you were to touch my hand, the message goes all the way to my brain to tell me my hand's being touched. But for me to go hand move, nothing happened. So it went one way, but it didn't go the other way.
So that's why you experienced a lot of pain and.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not unique to me. That's with everybody I've ever seen.
Yeah. And I mean, to explain to people who don't know, the pons is kind of the major highway, isn't it, for all the nerves coming from the brain and all the nerves going up to the brain. So very small, critical place. It doesn't take a big stroke. It doesn't have to be a big stroke to knock a lot of things off. When you
know what was interesting about mine was it was a series of clots, but the biggest one, it burst. But there was where I've seen patients and all they can do is move their eyes up and down, their outcomes are very, 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 very poor. That's anecdotal, but I've seen hundreds and hundreds around the world. Okay. But where people can blink, there's generally a lot of quite good rebound potential. But if my clot had spun the whole width of the artery,
yes,
there was no movement for rewiring. It's really interesting when you look at my brain scan. There's a big hole where the clot was, and there's a small channel where everything's rewired round. So I don't walk from my core now. I walk from my shoulders. I don't care how I walk as long as I walk. But it's fascinating.
Interesting. And I mean, for all the time you were brain dead, as far as the carers were concerned, did the care you received, was it different? Would it have been different if they knew you were there? Were you looked after less carefully?
No, listen, the doctors were generally appalling. You
Good.
know, they looked at they do ward rounds with all the other junior doctors at the bottom of the bed, and they talk about me like I wasn't there. That was upsetting. There were some very good, exceptional nurses who intuitively knew, but there were also some misery nurses who were health and safety crazy, and they wouldn't let my kids lie on the bed and give me a hug because of the infection risk, which I thought was deeply, deeply upsetting, and still do actually. I'm traumatized by that. But there were some very, very amazing nurses. There weren't a lot of them, but there were some incredible ones.
Yeah, yeah. It's always difficult for balancing health and safety and humanity on one side, and
Yeah.
so
But when you can't hug or do anything, that physical contact was just so important.
we saw that during the COVID, wasn't it? That was very emotionally traumatizing.
I've got you've mentioned COVID, but this is an interesting fact. You know, when we had COVID, I thought, now this is a very unique perspective, but I thought, how hard could it be to be locked in your own home? I mean, I've been locked in my body. Come on, I can go and have tea when I want. I can watch the TV when I want. I mean, that's an interesting perspective, isn't it? But actually, COVID was awful because I lost all my business and I was getting divorced. So yes, it wasn't great.
So how long were you locked in for before you came out of being locked in?
Can I throw it back to you and say, what's your definition of being locked in or locked out? Because this has been a constant debate. Oh, they're not locked in anymore. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that they're able to do their own personal care? They're no longer in a trachea or catheter, or they can walk 10 yards. What is the definition of being locked in, locked out?
I shouldn't be answering any questions, but I suspect it's I mean, generally it's up to the time when people realize that I suppose the communication, isn't it? The moment you can.
Well, I'm locked in, but at 2 weeks into my illness, my friend discovered a flutter.
Yeah.
But in terms of my quality of life, in terms of my physicality, I'm no different.
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't know. It was a constant debate in hospital. Well, what is the meaning of locked in and locked out? I don't know. All I know is, for me, having some control over my environment, whether it's using a switch or blinking to communicate, to figure out, my fan or my TV or whatever else. Having some control, it's got to go into that discussion.
Yeah.
And I was in the ICU for 9 weeks, and I was in rehab for 6 weeks, and then they gave me a review, and they wanted me to go to a nursing home. So they've got no idea where I was going to go into my rehab, and they'd written me off big time. So 9 and 6, that's 15 weeks before really I'd done anything. Yeah. And then that's when they started to ramp up the therapy, because my review wrote me off so much that with my background and my personality, I went, sod you, I'll prove you wrong. I'm not going to go to a nursing home. I'm going to go home to my young kids. Yeah. And they motivated me. And instead of feeling like giving up and wanting to pull my own plug out of the machine, which is what I was like after 15 weeks, I was like, damn you. But that's the middle child in me that's always been, if I'm told I can't do something, I'm like, watch me. Do it. So that really helped me. Yeah. But even at that point, I didn't overnight go, right, I'm going to start making my own dinner the rest of my life. It was just so slow. So I've never been able to answer locked in, locked out, and that's the truth.
Yeah, I suppose there's a philosophical dimension to that as well. But that's food for thought, obviously. Now you did say you almost died, and you were kind of considered to be vegetative. Did did it come close enough for them to consider switching the plug, so to say? Just did that
Well,
discussion?
they got my ex-husband in, and his response was, look, if Kate survives, it's unlikely, but if she does, she'll have no quality of life. So while you've got the opportunity, you can pull the plug, effectively. And he said, no, the kids need her. He didn't say, no, I love her. He just said, no, the kids need her.
He's a
And
man, he can't
I had
say
a
that.
stay of execution, which I'm pleased about, obviously. But it was that close. It was asked because there was no perception that I could possibly have an equality of life. Now, this is really interesting because and I need you to know this, where I've visited patients and they generally look up and down, and I know straight away without any brain scans, I'm not a doctor, I'm only an honorary doctor, I know without any tests, any medical history, nothing, they're unlikely to ever recover. And it's about not rehabilitation now, it's about quality of life stuff. And I can tell you that the people that haven't got any potential, I think, for rehab, I met some extraordinary people who have had the most amazing quality and do have the most. They're DJs with eye gaze machine. They study degrees. One was an ambassador for my charity. It's another one was a mouth painter because all she had was moving her mouth and she painted pictures. So to assume that you can't possibly have any quality of life I find that really upsetting because, yes, some people don't want to live, but I've only come across one who didn't, and he starved himself in Australia. So I think there's a huge discussion there about perceived quality of life, and there's a projection. Well, if I can't have a Starbucks coffee or eat my roast dinner, then, or watch my kids or whatever, then there's no quality of life. Well, I could give you thousands of stories that dispel that.
So one, difficult to predict who will get better, and two, wrong to presume what quality of life is for each and one.
That presumption is so dangerous because it's just not true. And I can tell you now, I don't know whether if I would have wanted to do it personally. To be a mum was all I ever wanted to be. I didn't want to do what I'm doing now. I wanted just to be a mum, to give my kids the upbringing I didn't have. But I think that we really do project, and it's so dangerous, because for me and for so many people, just to be able to be in the same room as their children playing, watching them play, listening to them, listening to the birds singing. The first time I ever brushed my teeth with an electric toothbrush, you cannot imagine what a boost, how phenomenal it was to have that control, to be able to do my own teeth. Be able to move that hair that's annoying off my forehead. We don't realize about quality of life. We just don't.
It's interesting, and how much the little things contribute to. We tend to overlook them, I suppose. Yeah,
we do, and it really does need unpicking because it's not about just wiping your own bottom or being able to transfer in the car or being able to eat a pureed food. It's about it sometimes for people just to be in the room, to observe, to watch their loved ones grow up, play, listen to music, be out in nature, have the wind on their face. The first time I got the wind on my face in the wheelchair in the hospital grounds, it was cold, but it was just It was extraordinary. I can't explain how important the things we just don't even think are important are.
Yeah, we worry about things that would never happen and get panicky about highfalutin things. And I mean, you went beyond this. You went back to running and driving, and you attribute that a lot to neuroplasticity, which is a growing concept, isn't it? The remarkable ability to rewire the brain. What?
It is, and it is remarkable. It's extraordinary to think that that little channel, my nerves have all gone, instead of doing that, they've gone round and down the little channel, and I can do everything I did. Yeah, I have dysarthria, I have dysphagia, I have a limp on my left side. I'm really bad with balance. That's a PON issue. It's affected sexually. It's affected my bladder, my continence, all these things, all of which I don't treat with any drugs. But the phenomenal ability of the brain to rewire and repair itself. I mean, we know about the moon, but I think we know only 10% of the power of the brain. I really do. I think it's untapped.
That's true.
But I just, for me, there's so much. I'm very interested now in the gut-brain axis. I think there's conditions as a result of my brainstem damage to my bowels, to my guts, to my urinary system, that they want to treat with drugs. I'm very drug averse, very pill averse, and I set out on a fermented gut health diet, eating 30 different foods a week. The doctors are saying, "How have you done this? How have you done this?" They want to put me in a trial. They want to give me all these drugs. I hate it. And I feel having self-medicated on Duclox, charcoal, just trying to get a handle on the repercussions of what I've had for years, and the depression and the wellness issues and the lack of wanting to be intimate with anybody new, because I've been with someone for 30 years. It was all very scary being with someone new. To think I've sorted it with taking my gut health really seriously, fermented foods, 30 different foods. So I'm very, very interested, especially with brain injury, what we can do about our gut health to help people with their wellness, but also with their continence and their, everything. It all starts with the gut, and it's something I'm fascinated about. And obviously also the mental effects of life-changing illnesses, because if you've had cancer or a road traffic accident or a stroke, you go through exactly the same emotions and struggles, and the peer mentoring is phenomenal, which is why I've done what I've done with my charity. It's been so successful. I don't have the charity now because the trustees got bored, but I do it privately. And I work a lot with charities and the NHS, and and work a lot with clinicians, because more so than users, because I want to help, talk about personalized care. What mattered to me was hugging my kids. What mattered to me was running by my first anniversary. What mattered to me was eating again. I hated being no by mouth. So I was talking personalized care and running free 14 years ago. It's a big buzzword now. What matters to you is it's the holy grail of getting people to be the best versions.
Yeah. And just on that, did your personality change after your experience? Did you change as a person rather than physically, just you as a...
For a decade, until COVID, for a decade, I was at the Olympic opening ceremony as a VIP. I was a huge speaker on Cunard. I did loads of research. I founded it, pioneered it. I changed the world. I went to visit people all over the world personally. I was frenetic because I had a passion. Lockdown taught me that when that all goes and I have nobody to help, I didn't feel good about myself. Giving is great, but when you have to give to feel good about yourself, That was a big learning for me in lockdown. Was I didn't know who I was when I couldn't help people anymore, and I had a huge wall. Had to do loads of self-development, and I've come out, and I was getting divorced at the time, and it was screwing me financially, and I lost all my business. So it was horror, and children with through childhood trauma and all the effects of that. I mean, I was hit rock bottom, and I didn't think I could hit rock bottom anymore, and I've had to build myself back up. So have I changed from the point of view of, am I that frenetic person that did all the things I did for a decade? No. I've left my mark. I've made a difference. I'm really, really proud that I turned something so horrible to such a positive experience. But I've done that. The way I've changed is the self-development has taught me to love myself for me, not because I help other people. And has taught me, if this is quite interesting, I have a theory of life. My theory of life is, one, to make a difference in the world. I've done that. Two, to belly laugh most days. I do that. And three is to collect memories with people who love me. That is the change. That I want to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm filtered. I'm channeled now. I don't try and be everything to everybody. I've got certain things like menopause and brain injury, gut health and brain injury, childhood trauma. There's quite a peer mentoring programs. There's quite a few things that I'm really keen on, but I'm more prioritized on me and collecting those memories, because that's the thing. If when I'm on my deathbed, that's the thing I haven't got so many of, because I've been pursuing. So in that way, I've chilled out. I'm less determined, but I'm determined to collect the memories.
So more focused on what matters, really. That's
spot on.
Which,
yeah,
which is a lesson we should all learn, but I suppose we're so busy in the rat race.
Yeah, but I feel at peace now, whereas you could argue that I was always pushing for something to try and prove something to me or to everybody else, because being disabled is a label that a lot of us don't like, and I'm in denial about it, and having to prove myself over and over that I'm not washed up, and that wasn't my life over at 39. And I've worked really, really hard, to be honest, but I'm proud of it, but I'm also focused on the last chapter of my life being more about me. My kids have grown up.
Yeah.
They know where I am and things are good, but it's about time to put me first.
Which is a good thing in many ways. You've written an inspiring book. You're still advocating. The charity, do you want to say a few words about it? I know that you've said it.
Well, it's no longer going. I had it for 5 years. I ran it voluntarily. I pioneered and set it up and all that stuff. It was called Fighting Strokes, and it was really set up because there was a gap in the market on Facebook, because all the stroke charities were so negative. They're like Debbie Downers. I've had a stroke. I've lost my husband. I've lost my job. Yes, I have. But, I don't want to be around negativity. So my charity was born not because I wanted my own thing, to have like a vanity project. It was because I wanted to be around positivity. I didn't want to be around negative people who are understandably down and pissed off, to be honest, about their life changing. But I didn't think that was going to help me. So I set my own up. That was why I did it. And the story of my life. No, I'm very proud of that as well, actually. Met some extraordinary people, did some extraordinary things. And that, I'm at TEDx, I've done various things, and I love speaking at conferences, especially clinical conferences, because talk about peer mentoring programs, how to set one up, why do it? Talk about gut health, I talk about menopause and brain injury. I love these themes because I'm 54, I'm in that, it's relevant. But it's really interesting when you look at the research on it, and there's some really big gaps and gaping holes. I'm much more focused on what I'm interested in. I've gone past rehabilitating. I've just started stand-up paddleboarding. And who'd have thought I could balance on a stand-up paddleboard? but I've done it. It's like someone, my son said to me when I told him I was going to do it, he said, Mum, good luck with that. And I've got the picture and the video. There you are, your mother's done it. And he was like, you always have to prove everybody wrong, don't you?
Well, it's you have proved a lot of people wrong along the way. We doctors, first of all. You talked about the gaps in the field of locked in. What would you say?
Do you know what?
Sorry.
Sorry, I was about to finish, but before you finish answering my question, I'm really sorry. If I don't answer it, then please tell me. Massive, massive issue. I get asked once a week, what are the research stats on locked in? What are the numbers of people who are locked in? What are the stats on improvement versus not improving, the vertical movement? Is that anecdotal insight I've given based on seeing more cases than probably any doctor have locked in around the world? Can it be backed up in research? Can we do the trials? And the answer is there's not enough money. It's a rare disease. And it really upsets me because my anecdotal stuff, as rich as it is, the knowledge I've amassed is irrelevant because it's not evidence-based. We'll get the evidence-based, well, there's no money. And then you're telling me what I'm saying is irrelevant. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. So there's a massive hole. Understandably, motor neuron gets a huge amount of money. It's the most awful illness, awful. But to go from running around 20 miles and then 12 hours later to be in that stage, that's awful as well. It might not happen to as many people, and it doesn't, but we need to understand it more. What are the factors that improve outcomes? Dr. Robert Teasel talked about repetitive, frequent, intensive actions after stroke for rehabilitation to optimize rehabilitation. And I would argue absolutely, but I would even say the research on the number of times you need to be practicing a movement and a day and the frequency of that, it needs to be ramped up. There's an argument that says if we say that, it's going to upset loads of patients and they won't do it at all. If they're going to be told they're going to do 800 a day, they're going to be like, yeah, right, I'm going to go and watch This Morning. But the point is, families need to know that because the reason I have such a lot of, I do these visits on Zoom and around the world, because families who contact me, I really want to fight the very best for their family. They want to be able to say, we did everything, everything. Because I always say, listen, no promises, just possibilities. This could go horribly wrong, i.e. not improve, or it could improve, which would be great. But it might not improve to my level, it might improve to a different level. But they accept that because that's honest. I'm not giving them false hope, but I'm not crushing their hope either. I'm just being honest and saying, this might work, it might not. But if you do nothing, it sure as hell won't work. And they go, right, what we got to lose? Let's do it. So what I say to them typically is when they're rehabilitating and they've got a little bit of movement, I say, listen, make sure you get from the neuropsychologist and the OT and the neurologist all the exercises you could be doing with them when you're on visits with them. Instead of talking about This Morning or rubbish, Glastonbury or whatever else, before you even talk about that kind of stuff, you do the mouth exercises if it's the mouth they're working on or it's the thumb. But having that information is really important. What are the exercises we need to be doing with our brother, our sister, our father, our mother, while she's not in rehab, because that might only be 3 times a week for 1 hour. We want them to be doing more because the research says you'll optimize your outcomes if you do these exercises so many repetitions a day, 5 days, 7 days a week or whatever. So I think there's so much research could do to inform. I do all this. I say, look, get the information, ask for the information, do it. Because it's not going to hurt as long as you're not trying to get them to do things like swallowing fluid, which could make them aspirate. No, you can have dry, chilled teaspoons. You don't need it, but I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is sitting in bed trying to rotate your arm isn't going to be a health and safety risk. So do it. Getting them to go to the toilet on the road would be a big ask if they're being hoisted and they're not able to transfer. But to do that, rather than sit there being bored, because that's a huge issue as well, is the boredom. The boredom is a huge issue, as is, I have to say, and I think it's an issue across all illnesses, is over-medicated and not regular enough drug reviews. Huge issue, because the side effects put what would be motivated mums, for example, with young kids, put them in a comatose state because of the side effects of these drugs. So there has to be some more, that I do believe, and I've seen this a lot, there has to be more regular drug reviews, and really understanding the impact of these drugs on their ability to be motivated or show up and do their rehab. Because so often they say, oh, they're fatigued. They're not fatigued. They're comatose because they're on so much drugs. So I'm not answering. I didn't know the answer. I shouldn't have interrupted you, but I think we need research. We need research.
Yeah, big gap right at the beginning, right at the base of there's a big gap right at the base for data. That's a lot of food for thought. I hope some researchers are out there, if they're looking for research questions. You've given so many out in this podcast.
Oh well, I've enjoyed being here, and I'm glad I'm here. My life has counted.
I was going to ask, your book was excellent. Are there any other books you would like to recommend in this subject or anything else?
When I was in hospital, the ICU nurse was really trying to be kind to my family in the early days, and she brought in a copy of The Diving Bell and Butterfly. Now, in that moment of kindness, and it was genuine kindness, because she was worried that they were inflating their ideas of what I'd be doing, and she was trying to temper them. This is what she's going to be like. In that moment, they changed from instantly fighting for me to thinking about how could they improve my quality of life. And it really hurt me. It wasn't until 2 years after I'd left hospital and I was back home that I was able to watch the film. Extraordinary. He was extraordinary. But it was a genuinely kind gesture that was actually very, very destructive. So whilst it's incredible insight as to what can be achieved with someone who can't do anything, and really did work very amazingly well, equally it could be very dangerous to be given in the situation my family were given it, because it was the only person that fought for me after that was my best mate. They'd all given up on me and thought, right, well, because they were told, this is how she's going to be, you better get on with your own lives. And they just took it literally, and they did. I was very hurt by that. But so no, I think I tend to steer clear of reading books. I've had loads of books sent to me of locked-in survivors, and I respect them all, but I can't read them because I've lived it. I'm very proud of my book though, because I went to an RCM conference and the chairwoman said it should be on nurse training courses nationwide.
Well,
so I was like, yes, because it was so raw and so real. And would I write it now the way I did? No, I would be too worried about upsetting people. But at the time, I thought I was going to die, and I need allegiance to anybody. I'm going to say it as it is. The only thing I did slightly gloss over was how bad things were in my relationship, because at the time I had no job, I lost my career, I was vulnerable. And whilst I didn't go in easy on my ex-husband, the first draft was a lot harder, but I had to rein it back because my publisher said, you might be out of a home. So I'm just saying that, but everything else,
as it was. Well, maybe to get onto the medical students reading list as well. It's a good insight into locked in.
Yeah. I'm just feel grateful that I was able to do what I've done since, because it has made difference to me, that I really feel like my life's been worth it, as hard as it's been with everything that's happened to me. Because since the illness 14 years ago with my controlling marriage and all that sort of stuff, it actually put it in, it made it quite not insignificant, but the pain I went subsequently through was a lot more. But they say bad things make us more resilient. I'm certainly the bounce back kid, aren't I? So I'm still here, still like a laugh.
Well,
still pushing myself in my stand-up paddleboarding.
A lot to be proud of. Kate Allatt, thank you very much for participating in this podcast. I'm very grateful. And to my listeners or viewers, if you found this podcast interesting, you might want to read Kate's book. And I also have a book you can read after that called Surfing the Brain. And for more academic things, I have a website called Neuro Checklist you may want to check up. And to make sure you don't miss the next episode of the podcast, you might want to subscribe to the YouTube, to the iTunes or the Spotify channels. But until then, thank you very much for your time. And Kate, thank you very much for sacrificing your time as well.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. You look after yourself.
Thank you very much.